The war was over, and the Fellerins had lost everything. Their beautiful homeworld of Velith Prime was nothing but ash and ruin now, destroyed by the endless bombardment from orbit that had lasted for weeks without mercy. The dominion of allied systems had won. Just as everyone knew they would from the very beginning, 12 powerful spacefaring civilizations had united against one small planet of cat-like people who had dared to refuse their demands for surrender. The Fellerins were proud beings who walked on two legs like humans, but had the features of great cats with soft fur covering their bodies and pointed ears that could turn toward any sound. Their eyes were large and golden and could see in the darkness better than any other species in the known galaxy. They had claws that could extend and retract, and tails that showed their emotions to anyone who knew how to read them. For 3 long years, they had fought against impossible odds, and for 3 long years they had lost battle after battle until there was nothing left to fight for. Now the survivors were being sorted like cargo in the great orbital stations that circled their dead world. The adults would be sent to labor camps, scattered across the outer colonies where they would work until their bodies gave out. This was considered merciful by Dominion standards. But there was a problem that the Conclave needed to address, and that problem was the children. 17,000 Fellerin cubs had been gathered and placed in holding facilities on orbital station Keth 7. They ranged in age from newborns who still needed milk to youngsters who were almost old enough to work. They huddled together in massive gray rooms with no windows and little food, their small bodies pressed against each other for warmth and comfort. Many of them had watched their parents die in the bombardment. Many of them had been pulled from the rubble of their homes by soldiers who did not speak their language and did not care about their tears. They did not understand why this had happened to them. They only knew that everything they had ever loved was gone. The Conclave met in the Grand Chamber of Unity on the capital world of the Dominion. A massive room with seats arranged in a circle so that all 12 member species could face each other as equals. High Arbiter Vox of the Chitha Hegemony stood at the center podium, his insectoid body towering over the other delegates. He had 4 arms and a head like a praying mantis with huge, compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. His voice was cold and mechanical, translated through a device that hung around his thorax. "We must now discuss the matter of the Fellerin offspring," he announced to the assembled delegates. "Our genetic analysts have completed their assessment, and their findings are troubling." He activated a holographic display that showed images of the cubs along with streams of data that most delegates could not understand. The Fellerin species carries hereditary markers for aggression that are deeply embedded in their genetic code. Vox continued. These markers cannot be removed or suppressed through any known medical intervention. The cubs are too young to work and too costly to feed and house for the years it would take them to become productive. Furthermore, allowing them to mature presents an unacceptable security risk to the Dominion. Our recommendation is systematic termination. He said these words the same way someone might discuss the disposal of broken equipment. There was no emotion in his voice at all. Several delegates nodded their heads or made gestures of agreement. The Fellerins had caused them great trouble during the war, and many soldiers from many worlds had died fighting them. Why should they waste resources on the children of their enemies? Why should they allow a future generation of warriors to grow up hating them? It was simply logical to end the threat now, while they had the chance. A delegate from the Vorn Collective spoke up in support of the motion. "The cubs will grow up to hate us no matter what we do," he said through his translator. "We killed their parents and destroyed their world, and they will never forget that. Better to end it cleanly now than to face another war in 50 years. More murmurs of agreement filled the chamber. The vote was scheduled for the following day, and everyone knew how it would go. 11 delegates would vote yes, and the motion would pass, and 17,000 children would be quietly disposed of. No one would speak of it afterward. History would simply record that the Felleran species had been reduced to a manageable population. Then a voice spoke from the back of the chamber. "I request the floor." The delegates turned to look at the human ambassador who had risen from her seat. Elena Vasquez was a small woman by the standards of most species present. She was 53 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and deep lines around her eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights. Her diplomatic uniform was plain and simple compared to the ornate garments worn by the other delegates. Humanity was the newest member of the Dominion. Admitted only 40 years ago, after making first contact with the Vorn trading vessels, they were considered politically insignificant. They held only one vote among 12. Their military was small, and their colonies were few, and most of the other species barely remembered they existed. High Arbiter Vox made a sound that might have been amusement. "The human delegate wishes to speak," he announced. "How curious." "Very well, Ambassador Vasquez. You may address the conclave." Elena walked down the long aisle toward the center podium. With every eye in the chamber watching her, she could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on her like a physical force. Some looked amused, some looked annoyed. None of them looked like they expected her to say anything worth hearing. She reached the podium and stood there for a moment in silence. Gathering her thoughts, she had been a refugee advocate on Earth before joining the diplomatic corps. She had spent 20 years working with people who had lost everything, and she knew what it looked like when powerful institutions decided that certain lives did not matter. She had seen that look on the faces of bureaucrats before. She was seeing it now on the faces of beings from a dozen different worlds. "I invoke the right of guardianship," she said clearly. The chamber went completely silent. High Arbiter Vox tilted his massive head as if he was not sure he had heard correctly. The right of guardianship was an ancient provision buried deep in Dominion law that most delegates had forgotten even existed. It allowed any member species to claim responsibility for condemned populations, to take them in and shelter them and answer for their behavior. If the claimed population caused any harm in the future, the guardian species would bear all consequences, including the loss of their seat on the conclave. It had not been invoked in over 300 years. "Ambassador," Vox said slowly, "do you understand what you are proposing?" Elena did not flinch. "I understand perfectly. If any of these creatures cause harm in the future, humanity will bear the consequence. Your vote, your colonies, your seat among us. I understand." Vox leaned closer, his compound eyes reflecting her tiny image 1,000 times over. "You would risk your species' place among us for animals." Elena felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. It was not fear, it was fury. "They are not animals," she said quietly. "They are children." The chamber erupted into chaos. The Grand Chamber of Unity had never heard such noise. Delegates were shouting over each other in a dozen different languages, while their translation devices struggled to keep up with the chaos. Some were laughing at the human ambassador as if she had told a particularly funny joke. Others were demanding that she take back her words immediately before she embarrassed herself further. The representative from the Koth Empire slammed his massive fist against his console and roared that humans were clearly too stupid to understand the laws they were invoking. The delegate from the Sorati Syndicate was making a high-pitched whistling sound that her translator rendered as hysterical laughter. Only High Arbiter Vox remained calm. At the center of it all, his compound eyes fixed on Elena Vasquez with an expression that might have been curiosity or contempt or something else entirely. He raised one of his forearms and the chamber slowly fell silent. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said in his cold, mechanical voice, "I will ask you once more to consider what you are doing. The right of guardianship has not been invoked in 3 centuries, and there is a reason for that. The last species foolish enough to claim condemned prisoners lost their seat within 20 years when those prisoners organized a rebellion. They were expelled from the Dominion and their worlds were sanctioned, and their people suffered for generations. because of one moment of misguided compassion. Elena stood perfectly still. At the podium with her hands clasped behind her back, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she refused to let any trace of fear show on her face. "I am aware of the history," she replied. "Then you must also be aware that the Fellerins are not like other species we have conquered." Vox continued. "They are predators by nature with instincts for violence, coded into their very blood. Our scientists have confirmed this, beyond any doubt. Even if you raise these cubs with kindness and teach them your human values, they will eventually turn on you. It is simply what they are." Elena thought about the images she had seen from Orbital Station, Keth 7. She thought about the cubs huddled together in those gray rooms with their ears flat against their heads and their tails wrapped around each other. She thought about the smallest ones, who were still crying for mothers who would never come with respect. "High Arbiter," she said, "your scientists are wrong." Vox made that sound again that might have been amusement. "And you know this how?" "Ambassador, you have never met a Felliran. You have never studied their biology or their history. You are from a species that has barely left its own solar system. What could you possibly know that our experts do not?" Elena took a deep breath before answering. "I know that every species in this chamber has been called savage or dangerous or unfit for civilization at some point in their history," she said. "I know that the Koth were considered mindless brutes until they built their first interstellar ships. I know that the Serati were hunted as vermin before they developed language sophisticated enough to communicate with outsiders. I know that my own species was dismissed as primitive apes by the first Vorn traders who visited our world." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each delegate in turn. "Every one of us was someone else's monster once," she continued. "Every one of us was feared and hated by someone who did not understand us. The only difference between us and those cubs is that someone gave us a chance to prove ourselves. Someone looked past their fear and saw something worth saving. That is all I am asking for today. A chance." The chamber was quiet. Now some of the delegates looked uncomfortable, as if Elena had reminded them of things they would rather forget. Others still looked skeptical, but the mocking laughter had stopped. High Arbiter Vox was silent for a long moment. Before speaking again, "Let us say for the sake of argument that you are sincere," he said. "Let us say that you genuinely believe you can take 17,000 Fellerin cubs and turn them into productive members of galactic society. How exactly do you plan to accomplish this? Humanity has limited resources and limited space and limited experience with alien species. Where will you put them? How will you feed them? Who will teach them?" Elena had spent the entire night preparing for these questions. "We have a colony world called New Cascadia that was terraformed 15 years ago," she answered. "It has vast forests and open grasslands and a climate similar to the Felliran homeworld. We have already begun reaching out to psychologists and educators who specialize in trauma recovery. We have families across human space who have volunteered to foster orphan children before and who are willing to do so again. We are not as wealthy as other Dominion members, but we are not without resources either. And most importantly, we are willing to learn." Vox clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "And if you fail?" he asked. "If these cubs grow up to hate you, as the Vorn delegate suggested, if they organize against you or attack your citizens or try to wage a new war, what then? Then we will face the consequences." Elena said without hesitation, "Humanity will accept whatever judgment the Conclave delivers. We will not make excuses, and we will not ask for mercy, but we will not stand by and watch children be slaughtered simply because someone is afraid of what they might become." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but somehow even more powerful. "I did not join this dominion so that my species could participate in atrocities," she said. "If that is what membership requires, then perhaps we do not belong here after all." But I refuse to believe that the 12 greatest civilizations in this part of the galaxy cannot find a better solution than murdering babies. I refuse to believe that fear is the only thing holding this alliance together. I refuse to believe that I am the only person in this chamber who knows that what we are discussing here is wrong. The silence that followed her words seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, High Arbiter Vox straightened to his full height and addressed the chamber. The human ambassador has invoked the right of guardianship according to the laws that govern this conclave, he announced. This right cannot be refused regardless of our personal opinions on the matter. The vote on systematic termination is therefore cancelled. The Faliran cubs will be remanded to human custody effective immediately. This session is adjourned. Elena felt her knees go weak with relief, but she forced herself to remain standing. Delegates were filing out of the chamber now, some glaring at her and others simply ignoring her as if she no longer existed. A few looked at her with something that might have been respect, but most seemed to think she had just made the worst mistake of her career. As she turned to leave, she found herself face to face with the Vorn delegate who had argued for termination. He was a large being covered in thick gray scales with small dark eyes that studied her. Without warmth, "You have done a foolish thing today." "Human," he said quietly. "Perhaps," Elena replied, "but I can live with foolish. I cannot live with murder." The Vorn made a sound that his translator did not render. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Elena stood alone in the empty chamber for a long time after everyone else had gone. She thought about what she had just done and what it would mean for her species and whether she had any right to make such a decision on behalf of billions of people who had never been asked. But then she thought about those cubs on orbital station Keth 7 who would wake up tomorrow still alive because of what had happened here today. And she knew that no matter what came next, she had made the right choice. The hard part was only just beginning. The transport ships arrived at New Cascadia on a cool autumn morning when the leaves on the imported earth trees were turning gold and red. 17,000 Felaran cubs stepped off those ships into a world that was nothing like the cold gray stations where they had been held. There was soft grass beneath their feet and warm sunlight on their fur, and the smell of growing things in the air. Many of them had never seen the sky before. They stood there staring upward at the endless blue with their mouths hanging open and their ears twitching in confusion. Some of the youngest ones started crying because they did not understand what they were seeing. The humans who had come to greet them did not rush forward or try to grab them or shout orders in strange languages. Instead, they simply waited, letting the cubs take their time, letting them adjust to this new reality at their own pace. It would be the first of many lessons that humanity would teach them. The first year was the hardest. The cubs were traumatized in ways that no simple kindness could heal. They had nightmares every night about fire falling from the sky and buildings collapsing and parents who screamed for them to run. Some of them lashed out at anyone who came close, swiping with their claws and hissing through bared teeth. Others retreated so far inside themselves that they would not eat or speak or even move unless someone physically guided them. The human caregivers were overwhelmed at first. They had dealt with troubled children before, but nothing had prepared them for this level of grief and fear and rage. Some of them quit in the first few months, unable to handle the constant stress and the feeling that nothing they did was making any difference. But others stayed. They stayed even when they were scratched and bitten. They stayed even when the cubs screamed at them in a language they could not understand. They stayed even when the whole project seemed hopeless and the rest of the galaxy was laughing at them for trying. A retired schoolteacher named Marcus Chen was one of those who stayed. He was 62 years old when he volunteered to foster a litter of 4 siblings who had been found hiding in the ruins of their family home. Their names were Rila, Keth, Myra, and little Tan, who was barely old enough to walk. They had survived for 3 days in that rubble, drinking rainwater and eating whatever scraps they could find. Before the soldiers came and took them away, when Marcus first met them, they were like wild animals. Rila, the eldest at 7 years old, positioned herself between her siblings and any human who approached. Her golden eyes were full of hate, and her claws were always extended, and she made a low growling sound whenever anyone got too close. She had decided that her only purpose in life was to protect what remained of her family, and she would fight to the death if necessary. Marcus did not try to grab her or discipline her or force her to behave. Instead, he simply sat down on the floor of the foster, on about 10 feet away from where the cubs had huddled together, and started talking. He told them about his life on Earth, about the small house where he grew up with his parents and 2 brothers. He told them about his years as a teacher and the thousands of students he had taught, and the joy he felt every time one of them finally understood something difficult. He told them about his wife, who had died 5 years ago, and how much he still missed her every single day. He told them about his decision to come to New Cascadia because he wanted to help children who had lost everything just like he had lost his wife. The cubs did not understand most of what he was saying, but they understood his tone, which was gentle and patient and never threatening. They understood that he was not trying to hurt them or take them somewhere, or do anything except sit there and share his presence. After 3 hours, Rila's growling stopped. After 3 days, she allowed him to bring food close enough for her siblings to reach. After 3 weeks, she let him sit within arm's length without tensing up. After 3 months, she spoke her first word of English. It was Marcus. She said it quietly, almost like she was testing the shape of it in her mouth. Marcus had to leave the room so she would not see him crying. The bond between them grew slowly over the following years. Rila learned English and then helped teach it to her siblings. She went to school with human children who had been prepared by their parents to treat the Felleran students with kindness and patience. She struggled at first because everything was so different and because some of the other kids were scared of her or curious about her in ways that made her uncomfortable. But gradually she began to make friends. She discovered that she loved mathematics with a passion that surprised everyone, including herself. There was something beautiful about the way numbers worked, the way they followed rules that never changed, the way you could trust them to behave the same way every single time, in a universe that had taken everything from her. Mathematics was the one thing that made sense. Her siblings grew up too. Kath became fascinated with human history and eventually wrote several books comparing Felleran and human cultural development. Myra discovered a talent for medicine and became one of the first Felleran doctors to practice in human hospitals. Little Ton grew into a gentle giant who worked with traumatized children, just like Marcus had worked with him. And Rila, fierce Rila, who had once sworn to kill any human who touched her family, found herself wanting something more. She joined the United Earth Defense Fleet at age 22. Her instructor said she had a natural gift for tactics that they had rarely seen in any species. She rose through the ranks faster than anyone expected, earning respect and admiration from humans and the growing number of Fellerans who had followed her into military service. By the time she was 30, she held the rank of captain. By 40, she was an admiral. Through it all, she never forgot where she came from. She visited Marcus Chun every chance she got, bringing her siblings and later their children to the small house in New Cascadia, where she had first learned that not all strangers were enemies. Marcus was in his 90s now, his hair completely white and his movements slow and careful, but his eyes still lit up every time Rila walked through his door. "I am so proud of you," he would say every single visit. "I am so proud of all of you." And Rila would kneel down beside his chair and rest her head against his arm, the way she had done when she was a frightened cub who did not know how to trust anyone. "You saved us." She would reply, "All of you saved us, and we will never forget." across New Cascadia and the other human worlds where Fellerins had made their homes. Similar stories were playing out. Cubs who had arrived broken and terrified had grown into doctors. And engineers and artists and teachers. They had married humans and other Fellerins and started families of their own. They had built communities and businesses and contributed to human society in ways that no one had anticipated. The Dominion had predicted that humanity would regret taking them in. They had predicted violence and rebellion and eventual catastrophe. They had been wrong, but the Dominion was not done testing humanity yet. 30 years had passed since the transports landed on New Cascadia. 30 years since Elena Vasquez stood before the conclave and spoke 3 words that changed everything. The cubs who had stepped off those ships as frightened orphans were now adults with careers and families and lives that stretched out before them, full of possibility. And Admiral Rila Chun stood on the bridge of the carrier, Unbroken Promise, watching the stars streak past the viewports as her fleet raced toward the outer colonies. The Chitha hegemony had finally made their move. For 3 decades, they had watched humanity grow stronger, watched the Fellerins integrate into human society, watched the alliance between the 2 species deepen into something that resembled family. High Arbiter Vox was old now, ancient by Chitha standards, but his hatred had not diminished with age. He had never forgiven humanity for humiliating him in the conclave chamber. He had never accepted that his recommendation for termination had been wrong, and he had spent 30 years waiting for the right moment to prove that he had been right all along. The invasion came without warning on a quiet morning. In the outer colonies, Chitha warships appeared from hyperspace in overwhelming numbers, their weapons already firing before human defense stations could even raise shields. 3 colony worlds fell in the first hour. 2 more were under siege by the end of the first day. Distress calls flooded communication channels. Desperate pleas from civilians who had thought they were safe, who had never imagined that a member of the Dominion would attack another member so blatantly. But the Chitha had calculated that the rest of the Dominion would not intervene. Humanity was still small and weak and insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic politics. The other species would condemn the attack publicly while privately being relieved that someone was finally putting the upstart humans in their place. Vox had gambled that no one would risk war with the hegemony over a species that most delegates still considered barely worth noticing. He had not counted on the Fellerins. Admiral Rilla received her orders while the Unbroken Promise was conducting routine patrol near the Kovacs system. She was to take her fleet and hold the line until reinforcements could arrive from Earth. The enemy force heading toward Kovacs station outnumbered her 3-1. They expect us to run, said Commander Vera Santos, her human executive officer. They expect us to fall back and regroup and give them time to dig in. Rila's ears flattened against her head as she studied the tactical display. The Chitha formation was standard and predictable. The kind of approach you used when you were confident that your enemy could not hurt you. They were not even bothering to screen their flanks. They are arrogant, Rila said quietly. They think we are still the frightened primitives they conquered 30 years ago. They think we will scatter at the first sign of overwhelming force. She turned to face her crew. Humans and Fellerins working side by side at every station. These were people she had trained with and served with and trusted with her life. Many of the Fellerins were fellow orphans from New Cascadia, cubs who had grown up together in the colony of second chances. They had something the Chitha could never understand. They had something worth fighting for all ships. This is Admiral Chun, she announced over the fleet-wide channel. The enemy believes we are weak because we are few. They believe we will break because we are young. They believe they can take what is ours because no one will stop them. They are wrong. Today, we show them what happens when you threaten our homes and our families and our future. Today, we teach them the cost of underestimating humanity. All hands to battle stations. We hold the line. The Battle of Kovacs Station lasted 18 hours. It began with the Chitha fleet advancing in perfect formation, their commanders already composing victory reports in their minds. It ended with those same commanders screaming into unresponsive communication systems as their ships burned around them. Rilla fought with a cold precision that bordered on terrifying. She read the enemy formation like a book written in a language only she understood. She saw weaknesses where others saw strength, and opportunities where others saw only danger. Orders came in rapid succession, each one perfectly timed to exploit some flaw in the Chitha approach. The Falirans in her fleet moved like extensions of her will. They understood her tactics instinctively, anticipated her commands before she gave them, adapted to changing situations with a speed that left the enemy reeling. The humans fought alongside them with equal ferocity. They had trained together and bled together and learned to trust each other absolutely. When a Falaran ship took damage, human vessels moved to cover it without being asked. When a human crew needed support, Falaran pilots were already on their way. They were not two species fighting side by side. They were one family defending their home. The turning point came 12 hours into the battle when Rila identified a gap in the enemy formation that would allow small strike force to reach the Chitha flagship directly. It was a desperate gamble. The ships she sent would be exposed and vulnerable for several critical minutes. If the timing was wrong, they would be destroyed before they could fire a single shot. Commander Santos, Rilla said calmly, take the strike group through the gap. I will keep their attention focused on the main fleet. Santos did not hesitate. Understood. Admiral, it has been an honor serving with you. Do not speak as if we are already dead. Rila replied, we have not come this far to die at the hands of insects who thought they could murder children. Now go. Make them remember this day. The strike group punched through the Chitha formation like a blade through paper. Human and Falaran ships flew together in perfect synchronization, their pilots communicating through a combination of verbal commands and instinct. They reached the flagship Eternal dominance before the Chitha could react. They hit it with everything they had. The massive vessel shuddered under the assault, its shields flickering and failing, its hull breaching in a dozen places. High Arbiter Vox sent a desperate transmission demanding surrender, his cold mechanical voice now tinged with something that sounded almost like fear. Admiral Rila answered him personally. You marked us for death, she said, her golden eyes burning on the view screen. You called us animals and voted to slaughter. Yes, in our sleep. One human said no. One human stood in your chamber and told you that we were children, not cargo to be disposed of. And now here I am, commanding a fleet that is tearing your armada apart. Now here are my people, fighting beside the species that saved us. You wanted to know what would happen if you gave us a chance to grow up. Now you know. She paused, letting the silence stretch across the void between their ships. Withdraw from human space. She continued, take your surviving ships and run back to your hegemony and tell them what you found here. Tell them that the cubs you wanted dead have become warriors. Tell them that humanity and Falaran stand together. And tell them that if anyone threatens our homes again, we will not stop at defense. We will come for them. The Chitha fleet retreated before the sun set on Kovacs Station. They left behind the burning hulks of hundreds of ships and the bodies of thousands of soldiers who had believed that victory was certain. High Arbiter Vox survived the battle, but his career did not. He was recalled to the hegemony in disgrace, stripped of his rank and his titles and everything he had spent centuries building the invasion that was supposed to prove humanity weak had instead shown the entire galaxy just how wrong they had been. And on the bridge of the unbroken promise, Admiral Rila Chun allowed herself one small moment of satisfaction before turning to the work of helping her wounded ships and honoring her dead. There would be consequences for what had happened here. The Dominion would have to respond, and Rila intended to make sure they understood exactly what they were dealing with. The Grand Chamber of Unity felt different now. The same circular arrangement of seats, the same high ceilings designed to impress visitors with the power and majesty of the Dominion. But the atmosphere had changed in ways that everyone could feel. The Chitha delegation sat in uncomfortable silence, their representatives carefully avoiding eye contact with anyone around them. The sanctions against the hegemony had been swift and severe, and everyone knew that more punishment was coming. High Arbiter Vox was not among them. His replacement was a younger Chitha who kept her head bowed and her mandibles still. The other delegates watched the human contingent with expressions that ranged from grudging respect to outright awe. These were the people who had taken on the mightiest military power in the Dominion and won. These were the people who had turned condemned orphans into the warriors who saved their colonies. Everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity was being reconsidered, but the biggest surprise was waiting at the podium. For 30 years, the Faliran seat on the conclave had been empty. The species had been considered extinct in any meaningful sense, their survivors scattered across human space without political representation or galactic standing. Today, that was about to change. Admiral Rila Chun walked down the long aisle toward the center of the chamber, wearing a formal uniform that bore both human and Faliran insignia. Her silver-touched fur was groomed to perfection, and her golden eyes swept across the assembled delegates without flinching. Beside her, moving slowly and leaning on her arm for support, was Marcus Chun. He was 93 years old, and his body was frail, and his steps were uncertain, but he had refused to miss this moment. He had flown halfway across the galaxy to stand beside the cub he had raised, to witness what she would say to the beings who had once voted to kill her. The chamber fell silent as Rila reached the podium. She helped Marcus settle into a chair that had been placed there for him, and then turned to face the conclave. 30 years ago, she began. 17,000 children were sentenced to death in this very chamber. We were called animals and monsters and threats to galactic security. Your scientists presented data proving that we were genetically predisposed to violence. Your leaders argued that it would be simpler and safer to eliminate us before we could grow up. She paused, letting her words sink in. One human disagreed. One small woman from an insignificant species that most of you had already forgotten stood at this podium and invoked an ancient law that no one expected her to know. She put everything her people had built on the line for children she had never met. She did not know us. She did not owe us anything. She simply believed that we deserved a chance to live. Rila's voice remained steady, but there was a depth of emotion beneath her words that filled the chamber like music. Her name was Elena Vasquez. She died 11 years ago on Earth, surrounded by Faliran children who called her grandmother, even though she had no biological grandchildren of her own. She spent the last decades of her life visiting New Cascadia, checking on the cubs she had saved, watching them grow into adults and start families of their own. She never asked for thanks or recognition or reward. She told us once that saving us was the proudest thing she had ever done, and that our success was all the reward she would ever need. Rila reached into her uniform and pulled out a small object that glinted in the chamber lights. It was a medal, simple and unadorned, with Elena Vasquez's image engraved on one side. In Faliran culture, we have a tradition of giving names to those who change our lives. Rila continued. These are not ordinary names. They are titles that carry the weight of everything that person means to us. Elena Vasquez was given a name by the first generation of cubs she saved. That name has been passed down to every Falaran child born in human space for the last 3 decades. It is the first word they learn after mother and father. In our language, it means the one who stood. She held up the medal so everyone could see it. Every Falaran who serves in the human military carries this image into battle. Every Falaran home has a place of honor, where her picture is displayed. She is not just a hero to us. She is the reason we exist. She is the proof that one person, one voice, one moment of courage can change the course of history. Rila lowered the medal and looked around the chamber once more. You asked once what humanity is, she said. You wondered why they would risk everything for strangers. You could not understand what possible benefit they could gain from saving children, who might never repay the favor. Now I will tell you, humanity is not the strongest species in this galaxy. They are not the oldest or the wisest or the most technologically advanced. Their lives are brief compared to most of yours, and their bodies are fragile, and their history is short. But they have something that many of you have lost. They remember what it means to be small and afraid and alone. They remember what it feels like to look up at a universe that does not care whether you live or die. And when they see others in that position, something inside them refuses to look away. Rila stepped closer to the delegates, a voice dropping to something that was almost intimate. Elena Vasquez did not save us because it was logical or profitable or politically wise. She saved us because she could not stand by and watch children be murdered. It was that simple. And that is what makes humanity different. That is what makes them worthy of respect and admiration, and yes, fear. Because a species that will risk everything for strangers based on nothing more than the belief that it is the right thing to do is a species that cannot be predicted or controlled or intimidated. They will stand against impossible odds, and they will sacrifice themselves for people they have never met, and they will keep fighting long after any rational being would have surrendered, not because they think they can win, but because they cannot live with themselves if they do. Not try. She turned to look at Marcus, who was watching her with tears streaming down his weathered face. This man took me in when I was a feral cub who wanted to kill anyone who came close. Rila said softly. He sat with me for hours and days and weeks, never pushing, never demanding, just being present. He taught me that not all strangers are enemies. He taught me that love does not have to be earned. He taught me that family is not about blood or species or genetics. It is about who shows up when you are broken and stays until you are whole again. She knelt beside his chair and took his frail hand in her own. I am Admiral Rila Chun of the United Earth Defense Fleet, she announced to the chamber. I am a daughter of New Cascadia and a child of 2 worlds. I carry the name of Elena Vasquez in my heart and the love of Marcus Chun in my soul. And I am here to tell you that the Falaran people will stand beside humanity for as long as both our species endure. You saved us when you had every reason not to. You raised us when everyone said we would turn on you. You trusted us when no one else would. That debt can never be repaid, but we will spend the rest of our history trying. She rose to her feet and faced the conclave one final time. This is what humanity is, she declared, small and brief and stubborn beyond all reason, and utterly magnificent because of it. The chamber remained silent for a long moment after she finished speaking. Then, slowly, one by one, the delegates began to rise from their seats. It was an ancient gesture of respect, one that had not been offered to any speaker in the Grand Chamber for centuries. Even the Chitha representative stood, her head still bowed, acknowledging something that transcended politics or revenge. Marcus Chen was weeping openly now, just as he had all those years ago when a frightened cub finally let herself be held, and Rila stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her golden eyes bright with pride and grief and hope on New Cascadia. In the central plaza of the capital city, Workers were putting the finishing touches on a new statue. It depicted a small human woman with gray-streaked hair and fierce eyes. One hand raised in defiance, at her feet, carved in Falerian script and translated into 100 languages, were the words she had spoken that day. They are children. Every year, on the anniversary of the rite of guardianship, Falerian and human, families would gather at that statue. They would light candles and tell the story to their children. They would remember a woman who stood alone against an empire and won. And they would teach the next generation that sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the greatest weight, because one name, spoken with conviction, can echo through the stars forever. The end.